And I've also started the AI companion, I think. Okay, so just wanted to welcome everybody. I know we were talking a little bit before everybody got on about how busy the holiday season gets, so appreciate everybody taking their time out of their day. We are here from Wheeled Women Inspiring and Elevating Leadership in Diabetes, which is a grassroots community of supporters for women in the diabetes space. We do these educational seminars, webinars every couple of months generally, and really topics that have come up from the field or from people or from our own groups. So if there's any topic that you're interested in seeing on one of these webinars, in fact, I think the one we're going to do in early 2026 is really for academics on building resilience in this sort of day and age of being an academic scientist and what that looks like. Also, given where we are as well, and the challenges, especially here in the US, around academic careers. This is also very timely. We've been talking about other ideas around alternative careers outside of academia for a while, and I guess there was a small group discussion at the TOS meeting last month, and we decided to do this as part of a larger webinar. So we've got one, two, three, four panelists and myself as moderator. All of us have had academic careers, been in academia at some point in our lives, whether for grad school or postdoc. Others have been in a little bit longer, and all of us are now currently in different industry positions. So I tried to, or nonprofit, I tried to get a mix of people that to really talk about different experiences. And I think what you'll hear when we start talking about experiences and questions, and that nobody's experience is the same in terms of even what a career looks like. I know that when I was in grad school, it was, the sort of the binary option was you become an academic scientist or you become a research scientist in industry. And I think what you'll hear today is that there's a much broader world out there than just those two options, and especially when it comes to industry. Those of us who have been in industry a little bit longer can really, talk about where you see people with advanced degrees in all aspects of pharma. I mean, you see them in marketing and sales and everywhere. It really is beneficial to have scientific degrees, even when you're in sort of the maybe not as traditional scientific disciplines in industry. So I will pause there. I will actually maybe give myself a quick introduction, then we'll go around the room, the virtual room, and have everybody here give a quick intro. And I told my panelists that I love doing icebreaker questions. And so we're gonna just ask name, current job, and because a lot of us have long storied histories. And what was the first job, and what skill or lesson did you learn that still shows up in your professional life today? So I never make people do icebreaker questions if I'm unwilling to do them. So I'm Jessica Dunne. I'm a medical director here at Sanofi working in type 1 diabetes. My first job was as a cashier in a discount department store called Caldor. I think it was very restrictive to the Northeast in the US. I think the skill that I learn, lesson or skill, is to treat everybody with respect. I moved up in the world from cashier to customer service, and that was always a challenge, especially in the post-holiday return frenzy. And people who would wear shoes that were clearly worn for like 6 months and try to return them and not understand why you couldn't return them. And so it's a little bit of just, again, just trying to treat everybody with respect and understand that everybody's coming from the place of their own past and their own experiences. So Lucy, you're the first one I see on my screen, so we'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for inviting me to the panel. So I'm Lucy Hinder. I'm a translational research scientist by training, but currently a medical science liaison at Rhythm Pharmaceuticals. So my first, I guess, proper job was when I was 17 for about a year. I cleaned hotel rooms, and that really helped me to kind of recognize and champion often unsung heroes, I think. So, folks whose work isn't always shiny and exciting, but it's absolutely essential. So that was a really kind of foundational experience for me. And I travel a lot for work, and it also taught me to always leave a tip in a hotel room. So always do that if you can.
I love it. Maggie, you're next.
I'm Maggie Morris Fears. I am a program officer at NIH, I oversee a portfolio of type 1 diabetes and primary immune deficiency. And my first job was as a clerk in a fabric store. And I would have to say, probably learning about patience, which I figure is a lifelong journey. So it certainly wasn't like a miracle skill that I learned from there, but I continued to develop patience.
Love it. Johnna?
Yes, my name is Johnna Wesley. I am a PhD immunologist and have a master's in business administration and public health. My current role is I am the head of biology and translational science at Protagonist Therapeutics in the Bay Area. My first job was working at a florist with my mom, so my mom's business. And I was doing flower arrangements, interacting with customers, and delivering flowers and arrangements and balloons, which till this day, I hate balloons, all over the parish. And I grew up in southern Louisiana, hence the parish. And what I learned was patience as well, like Maggie, and this realization that people experience the world quite differently than I do. I was like 15 at the time, 15, 16, and it was an eye-opener. And till this day, I carry that with me and also, like Maggie, continue to work on my patience and my poker face. So,
I think we all do. Simi, last but certainly not least.
Hi, I'm first off, thanks Jess for inviting me to this panel. I am a scientific director at the Critical Path Institute. I work in type 1 diabetes, but also cross portfolio, and we can talk about that in a second. My first job was actually my first proper job was as a circulation desk staff at the biomedical library at my college. And a couple of things that I learned there that were very useful life lessons. One was I had the authority to waive some late fees if they were justified. So these sleepy med students would come and have these various excuses, and I learned how to make them kind of justify their reasons, and on numerous occasions, waive those. So I learned how to kind of read people, understand people, and not just give away stuff because I could. And the other thing that I learned was to make really good friends with staff and understand people so that whenever I needed a sub, I always had somebody who was willing to fill in for me.
I think all of these life lessons probably also carry with us through to today. So thanks everybody for their intros. If folks have questions, you can put them in the chat. But we've got some prepared questions just to sort of kick off the discussion. And maybe, John, I'll start with you. What motivated you to pursue a career outside of academia, and how did you identify your first step into your current sector?
sure. So I think like one of the key motivators for me one was I was a graduate student, I was doing animal studies, and my nephew got diagnosed with cancer. And I was suddenly like, okay, this is why I'm here. I want to understand science. I want to understand sort of biology that's human relevant, and I want to help people. I want to help kids like my nephew, and I want to help families. And then as I sort of progressed through my graduate work, you get really focused on your little corner of the world. And then I went into postdoc, and very quickly I realized we were saving a lot of mice. And that was not really what I wanted in my life. I appreciated the basic sciences. I see where they bring a lot of value. We need those. It's critical. We also need science education. But I wanted to sort of be closer to seeing that translation of the idea to impact on people. And so the first thing I did as when I sort of had this aha moment of like, I'm not an academic scientist. I don't want to write grants. I don't have this kind of patience. I want a different career. I started talking to people that were working in areas that I was interested in. and sort of just ask for advice. I would talk to anybody. If people were willing to chat with me, I would like go and buy them a cup of coffee, and chat with them. And ultimately, I just sort of took a risk and got a little pushy for my first job. I interviewed, it went well. They rejected me, and the job was still posted a few weeks later. And I reached out to the hiring manager and I offered to work for free. I was like, I want the experience. I'm a postdoc. I know I can't get into industry without having industry experience. I'm willing to work for free or work for short term, because you told me the team needs help. And 2 days later, I had a full-time job offer, because I reached out to them and sort of put myself out there. So I think that was sort of what motivated me and sort of the steps I took to get that first job and get my foot in the door.
So Lucy, I'm going to guess maybe you didn't offer to work for free in your first foray. So what motivated you
Yeah.
to pursue a career
Unfortunately,
outside of
I'm not
academia?
independently wealthy enough to be able to offer my
I didn't ultimately work for
services
free,
for
but you
free.
know.
But and I think there's a lot of overlap in kind of my motivations. But I think, Jess, you talked about kind of that binary choice, branching. You either stay on the academic conveyor belt to have your own lab, lead your own research group, or you go kind of into research and industry. And I was very much on that academic track to have my own lab. And then when it was kind of in front of me and I was interviewing and actually got offered a position to have my own lab with a great deal, I thought, oh man, is this actually what I even want? I've just been kind of going through the motions, and I realized that it was getting further and further away from why I got into science and translational research. So I was in a fortunate position where I was kind of junior faculty at University of Michigan. My mentor said, we love you being here. Take time to figure out what you want to do next. So I really did take that time to do a lot of networking, informational interviewing, kind of going to conferences and just tracking people down, making connections, just having a lot of conversations. And then I ended up connecting with a recruiter that somebody in my network recommended. And relatively quickly, she actually matched me to a couple of job opportunities, and I had my first job as an MSL. So yeah, just taking stock and networking and asking yourself a lot of questions, I guess.
Thanks, Lucy. And I think Maggie, you've probably had the longest of our tenure as an academic among our panel, and so your change to non-academia has been more recent. And so you want to talk a little bit what drove your decision making there? And I think the key here is that it's maybe never too late, right? So
Yeah, yeah, I think it's definitely never too late. And I will say that my motivation was perhaps a bit more negative than other people's. So I was in a situation, an academic institution, where there was a huge amount of toxicity in the environment, and just I was trying to advocate for myself in getting fair pay compared to male colleagues, and I was running up against walls and yet doing more than some of the male colleagues that were making well above what I made. And I remember having a conversation with my husband at one point, like I was in tears because, I got a paycheck where I was supposed to see a pay raise and there was not a pay raise. And I was in tears, and my husband's like, you can quit and take a couple months off. We can make that work. Like, this is ridiculous. And so at that point I was like, okay, I've got to find something different. And I kind of looked at other academic opportunities, but nothing was really a great fit for me at that point in my life. And I happened to think of a grad school colleague that worked at NIH, and I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, do you think this would be a good match for me?" And he's like, "Absolutely." And so we talked through things, and I actually did not make the what's called the cert list my first time through. So this is a process. Anyone on this call, if you want help navigating that process, I'm happy to do that. There have been some changes, and I'm not sure how those have impacted things lately, but I'm happy to help people with that. So the second time he actually went through the questionnaire with me, and he helped me because the questionnaires are very much written to what the job is that you're applying for rather than what are the skills for that job. So you have to be able to translate that presenting, like managing a budget from an NIH standpoint is like you have to be able to say, oh, okay, I was a biomedical sciences program director and I managed a budget of X dollars. So even though I'm not managing that NIH budget, I had managed a budget. So it's being able to translate those skills. And so he helped me to do that. And the second time through, I made the cert and had, I think, I had 3 in-person interviews, like second round interviews, and I think I would have had 3 offers, but I opted to take one before I got the third offer. So I was an SRO for 3 years and then moved to program side of things. So that was my journey.
And I think you highlighted something that maybe we'll dig a little bit deeper into later, which is as you're sort of job searching, use your network. And so I think certainly that's how I've found the last 3 jobs I've had is through my personal and professional network. And even in the application process, as Maggie said, there was a question, maybe we'll jump to that after we hear Simi's answer about what do employers outside of academia value most during the hiring process? But let's hear from Simi first in terms of what drove her to leave her academic career.
Yeah, thanks, Jess. Actually, first and foremost, I should apologize for being so far away from the camera. I'm having eyesight issues as of late. Had an accident about a year ago, and this is the latest gift from that. So apologize for it. I'll try to be as close as I can. So listening to my colleagues, I actually have to admit that the 2 main reasons for me leaving the academic bench after my postdoc were pretty selfish. The first one was that I realized as much as I loved designing experiments and coming up with the question and the one after that and the one after that and addressing them, I really wasn't good with my hands. My gels looked really, really bad. I would get all these results and ready for publication, and then the lab tech would have to go back into the freezer, get my samples, and rerun all those gels so that we could publish the figures. And it just got to a point where it was just frustrating, and I thought, I can't have a career like this. It just wasn't enjoyable, sort of the mechanics of it day to day. So there's that frustration. And the second one, I think, was the cumulative one, I think a little bit in line with what my colleagues have said, which is I realized over time, and this started during my PhD career, where my advisor would say, Simi, it's great. We can keep talking about what the results might look like. You got to go run the experiment first, right? And so I appreciated that if I were to go into an academic career, by definition, I'd have to take a reductionist approach, pick a field, pick a space, pick a compelling question, and go as deep as possible and try to solve it with my peers. And I realized that what I really enjoyed most was this zooming in and out of scientific data. And yes, there was an element of impact and translation that played a role. But in that moment, when I, sort of really finally came to the conclusion that I will switch, it was really because of that kind of lack of fit and wanting to be more in a space where I could be associated with strategy and executing that strategy. Sorry, Jess, you're on mute.
No, yeah, I just realized that. Okay, so maybe we'll then we had a couple of questions pre-submitted, and I think, based on what you've all said, maybe we'll just stick with you, Simi. In terms of what do you think the employers outside of academia valued most during the hiring process? So you talked about maybe your your bad experimental design. So when you're looking at non-lab space, that's maybe not as lab positions, maybe that's not as critical, and you don't highlight that. But you talked a little bit about how this idea about, really science and strategy. And so how did you sell yourself in terms of that to potential employers? And what other skills do you think helped you land your first job outside of academia?
Yeah, I would say, I think for the first job outside of academia, and I didn't mention where it was. So I joined, then known as JDRF, now known as Breakthrough T1D, as a program scientist. And I ended up staying there for 10 years, give or take a couple of years that I was out because I was out of the country. Um, I think it was partly luck, partly timing. I didn't really quite know how to explore this space. The tools were so limited back then. But I knew that I needed to kind of, what's option B, and kind of fumble my way to option B. I would say that when I interviewed and when I kind of did that two-way learning of what the job entailed, I made it very clear exactly what I said, which is, the reasons why I'm really motivated to leave the scientific bench, but not leave science, and in fact, really become integrated into a landscape effort. So that job as a program scientist at JDRF really fit that mold in a way. I think from their point of view at the time, they obviously needed somebody who could run a part of the portfolio. So by necessity, that would be zooming in and out, which really appealed to me. And when I say in and out, which is deep inside projects, being able to look at the scientific data, but also to zoom out and look at where these projects fit into a program and then into a broader portfolio, and how we could advance research and science and translation for a particular disease indication. It happened to be type 1 diabetes at the time. I kind of fell into it. I'm a trained immunologist. I did inflammation and cancer immunology in my PhD and postdoc respectively. So all of those were fits. I would say for the first job, and I have other things to add for subsequent jobs, this is my third job since my postdoc. I think folks like to see how you think. So, being able to kind of communicate that ability or desire to think out of the box goes far. And if that's important to you, I think it matters to employers who are looking for that as well. And then to be able to effectively communicate that, because that's also a skill set that I think I had to learn over time.
Thanks, Simi. And Lucy, maybe I'll pivot to you because as an MSL, and I'm not sure everybody here on the call actually maybe knows what an MSL is, so maybe give a 30-second overview about what an MSL does. But you're a very externally facing role. And so how does that differ, and what kind of different skills than what kind of Simi just talked about do you think you need as a externally facing scientist in industry?
Great question. Yes, I think it's really hard to capture what an MSL is and does succinctly. It's kind of a challenge that we always have. But I think the definition is that we're a field-based medical professional, and we are a scientific bridge between a pharmaceutical company or a biotech company and healthcare providers. So our job is to share unbiased clinical and scientific information to support evidence-based patient care. And that's kind of it in a nutshell, but it's so much more than that. It's really interacting with just experts in a specific disease space. They can be clinicians, clinician scientists, purely academic researchers, but kind of working with them to communicate our science, how we're understanding disease states that we're in, our clinical trial data, connecting to enroll clinical trials, but also bringing back insights from the field. So are we getting it right? Are there blind spots? How can we kind of pivot and change our strategy based on what we're learning from the experts out there doing the actual real work? So that's kind of what an MSL does. But I think because we're externally facing, we really need to have strong scientific communication skills. Everybody has competitive CVs coming into the medical science liaison space, but how do you show up? How do you demonstrate those soft skills, the things that you really can't teach as well? And I work in I've worked in two small biopharma companies in the rare disease space. So I think they're very lean in terms of kind of the team sizes. So really communication, collaboration, flexibility, problem solving, and how you contribute to the team culture, all of that's really essential because you're not just in one small lane. Yes, you're doing what you're meant to be doing as an MSL, but you're also exposed to so many other functions and you get pulled into projects. If you raise your hand and say, hey, I think this needs to be done, you can, go off on a tangent and do a side project. So there's a lot of scope for contribution. So, but I think the communication, collaboration, just all that flexibility and problem solving are really key to what serves you well as an MSL.
Yeah, and maybe I mentioned that I'm a medical director. So what that means is I'm also in medical affairs, but whereas Lucy's role as an MSL is field based, I'm what's home office based. And so all the things she said about even the field based is also true about the home office base. And the way I also describe it is internally, we're still externally facing, but internally we're kind of the bridge between R&D and commercial. And so all the things that Lucy said around unbiased and really shaping the field is where we're supposed to be operating. And so, as Lucy mentioned, there are projects that happen within medical affairs in terms of advancing the science and things like that. And we often bring our MSLs into those, and we love this idea of cross matrix. So I always say that for our roles, especially, I think the soft skills, as Lucy mentioned, the everybody's got these amazing CVs, but all of our interview questions are around how you work and how you operate. And so, like, those soft skills are so critical. I mean, we've not hired the best person on paper because they didn't have those soft skills. And so, that's something that I don't think gets taught enough in academia. I was actually just down at UVA, my alma mater, on Friday, and I had a lunch with some of the graduate students. And I think as graduate students too, and postdocs, you're often taught to self-promote. And that's the thing that can actually kill you in an industry position. So it's a lot more about teamwork and how you operate within a matrix and a team. Maybe I'll pivot to Johnna next. You followed a more traditional R&D route in your career. And so what do you think, what kind of skills do you think, and I guess the question was, what do employers outside of academia value most during the hiring process?
Yeah, so I've been on both sides of sort of like the hiring and building of teams. So I worked at Novo Nordisk for 12 and a half years, and then I joined Protagonist. Before Novo, I worked at a cell therapy company in Seattle. And so I've been in that like individual contributor, research scientist, sort of driving experiments, and then people managers, and then strategy, and then executive leadership. And I think looking at it from the hiring side, a lot of the things, I mean, it's very position dependent, but when we're thinking about like PhD level scientists, the things that we are going to look at are going to be a lot of the same things that have been mentioned. How do you think through a problem? And do you really, or what kind of experience do you have in working with teams? Because I think, as a graduate student, you are sort of like you are responsible for your project and it's all on you. And you're sort of working in this silo, at least that was my experience. And you're not really taught the value of we're all on the same boat. And we are going to sink or swim together. And so if I succeed, you succeed. And I think understanding like how people perceive that type of working environment, it's important to understand that critical thinking space, the teamwork, flexibility. I also like to sort of gauge how people think about very abstract questions because a lot of the things that we have to work on in industry are not very black and white, and you have to sort of look for the grays. And you also have to be able to give up your project really fast because you don't own that project. You are the scientific expert, but you don't own it. And like, you can gauge that when you're talking to people about like, one, how they work with others. Are they independent? Are they a team player? How do they feel about the flexibility of moving between different projects or targets? And how do they see their biology expertise? I also just like to sort of chat with people and sort of see what it is they're really looking for in a career, because it might be that this job doesn't fit them for what they're looking for, and they're just trying to get into a job. And that often comes across in an interview, and you have to take that into consideration sometimes. But really, it's that I think for me, it has always been that ability to work in teams and how do you think about problems.
Yeah, and I think something you said just struck with me too, which is, people just kind of looking for a job, any job. And so I think another key is do your homework, because I often ask people, why
Yeah.
this job and why now?
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to have the next 10 to, I mean, I still get asked from my manager, like, what do I want to do in 5 to 10 years?
I do.
And I still say, like, I have no idea, right? And
Yes.
I think but I think you can talk about very easily. So do your homework on the positions that you're also
Yeah.
hiring,
And the
interviewing for.
company. Like
Yeah.
I have interviewed people before where you ask them like why when I was working at Novo Nordisk, like why this company? And the only thing I got was they work on diabetes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
there's a lot of public information about what's in the pipeline or sort of like what's recent acquisition type stuff. And it is easy to find that information. I mean, now you can go into like ChatGPT or Perplexity and you can write up a prompt and sort of get a whole download of a company. You do need to curate it because it might be wrong, but it's a good place to start. Um, so I think that's a good point. Like also like do go in prepared. And I guess one other thing, and then I'll stop talking. If you're giving a presentation, um, gear it towards the audience. Try to understand sort of like who's there. Give a little more background if it's not an immunology group that you're presenting to, but it's chemistry people. You need to talk a little bit more about what a T cell is, if that's what you're talking about. But don't give so much detail people get lost. Because I think that as an academic scientist, we like to show people all of the work that we have done. And the reality is you need to be able to pare it down because to message yourself or to sell yourself and to message the science, you need to give people the cues as why is this important? And what are the key bits of data you need to focus on to tell you this is important? Because all too often people, it's just a data dump. And you kind of get lost because that also shows how you think about your problems and how you think about the science that you're doing and the value that it brings.
Yeah, and I think that's all really good. And I think that's echoed even, as we think about somebody like Lucy who's externally facing versus the more, again, traditional R&D role. But there's always communication, right? For, as you mentioned, Johnna, the people, like you could be told tomorrow your project doesn't exist and one of those key pieces is how you communicate what you're doing to the people who are making decisions about what you're doing, right? So, we always say here, like less is more, right? You've got to be
Yes.
able to distill this highly detailed project that you're working on into an elevator pitch, because that's the attention span. So,
Yeah, that elevator pitch is critical. I mean, there are oftentimes you go into a presentation and you might not get past the first slide.
yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, Maggie, we're going to end with you in terms of like you again are now with NIH. So, what do you think? Your or the What do employers value outside of academia? Oh my gosh. What do employers outside of academia value most during the hiring process? And we kick this off because of you leveraging, some of your peers to help you guide you through. So,
Yeah, so I think all of the skills that all of you have mentioned, the communication, I think particularly for health scientist administrator positions at NIH, you really do want to have 1 year of postdoc experience. So that's something that hasn't been mentioned, but I think that that's valuable. So whether or not you plan on going into academic research or even having an industry postdoc, I think academic postdocs are probably a little bit better for NIH positions. I think that's really invaluable, but it's also beneficial. I have seen, having had the academic faculty career before, I think really helped give me perspective when I look at how I understand what the principal investigators in my portfolio are going through, and how I recruited and how I thought about the science is very different from my peers that only did a postdoc. And I think it has helped me to get a little bit, bigger picture, better understanding of the way things operate, and put me in a position to be more competitive for some leadership positions and leadership programs and career development. And I think another thing that hasn't been mentioned is really the ability to deal with challenging situations, whether this is a personal resilience standpoint, or how do you interact, like part of communication, how do you interact with challenging individuals? And you get people, especially, and not as frequently as I encountered in academic research, but you do get some principal investigators that are challenging, and they're like, well, my grant should be funded because I am who I am. And you're like, no, like that doesn't necessarily hold sway, right? So how do you deal with those individuals in a way that doesn't completely burn a bridge, but gets you off the hot seat? So that's, and I think also entwined in the communication skills is really listening to what people have to say, because that will give you a better idea of where they're coming from and what they're thinking. So you want to listen to people in order to learn, rather than not listening and just saying your piece, I think is.
That makes a lot of sense. And maybe I'll pivot to the next question, because I think it ties along with what you were just talking about a little bit in terms of, because you've got a very unique role, right, where you're interacting a lot with academic scientists, right? But even not just in terms of the people that you are working with in the academic sphere, but what do you think are the major misperceptions or common misperceptions about your role, both from the people you work directly with, as well as, peers that may be like somebody like myself who you don't work directly with, and what do you think are the most common misperceptions about what your role should be versus what your role actually is?
So I think one misperception that's maybe a broader one, you hear a lot about people saying government employees are lazy. I do want to dispel that, because I would say 99% of the people I work with work their rear ends off and really want to do their best as a civil servant for the country. So I want to lay that out there. I think some people think we have more power than we actually do. So program officers do not have the final say on funding decisions. We can make recommendations, but in the end, it goes to council, and then it goes to the IC director, and now it even goes up to an NIH political appointee. So we do not have all the power to make a decision. Same goes for funding opportunities. And I think on that front, people are like, maybe they're more aware now, but I don't know if people think we can just like pull money from the air and put together a funding opportunity. That's not at all how that works. And actually the funding opportunities for my institute are put forth, like we are working on fiscal year 28 right now. So really far in advance. Not all institutes do it that far in advance, but there's a lot of internal competition for those funds, and now we have significant limitations on the numbers of NOFOs. So even to get NOFO is a notice of funding opportunity, even to to be able to put forth an idea, it has to be a really stellar idea to get through all of the competition.
Thanks, Maggie. And so, Simi, I'll pivot to you as somebody who's also spent a long time in the nonprofit sector. What do you think is the most common misperceptions in your role?
I would say, thanks, Jess, for the question. I would say, from a really 300,000 foot point of view and um, considering viewpoints of folks from many, many sectors, there can be a misperception that if you're in nonprofit, you're existing in an environment that's inefficient, lacks rigor and formal SOPs, is suboptimally funded, which is often true, but not always true. And, fueled mostly by advocacy. So I will be the first person to say that all of the above are untrue, and not only untrue, to kind of echo what Maggie was saying. I think there's a certain phenotype of person that gets attracted to this space, and we sometimes to our detriment put our passion and public service hat on before anything else. But we can't help it, and that's where we're happiest, right? So that's the first thing that I often find dispelling and communicating, and I think it typically comes across when you're talking to folks in in any sector where they're passionate about what they're doing, nonprofit or profit or otherwise. Um, I think the second part of your question, I don't know if you've asked it, Jess, is what would you like, earlier mid-career professionals to know? And I'll just kind of pair that up in the interest of time. Part of the reason I do what I do, or that I found myself doing what I'm doing, is that I love having my fingers in various things all at the same time. And various industries don't make it easy, not by intention, but probably by design. For example, like Johnna's career trajectory, right? If I were to want to step into her industry role at this stage in my career, it matters that I do not have an industry pedigree. It matters that I didn't do hands-on drug development. In my space, however, or it is that the world is by definition evolving towards a cross-discipline, cross-sector set of realities, right? And I thrive in that. And so for those who are earlier mid-career, my recommendation is to, think beyond the box, not just outside of the box, think cross-discipline, collaborate with people from sectors you would never think of. I have, again, navigated to a place where I am associated with a field that's close to me, but I also get to dip into advances and challenges that exist in other fields. So my one major advice or comment, in addition to dispelling sort of the various myths that are associated with nonprofit, is that nonprofit is headed to a whole other dimension, and we're living in that time.
I love it. And thanks for reminding me of the second part of that question, which I think, it's maybe ties into the question that was in the chat. And so maybe we'll move on to our industry representatives. And Lucy, I'll start with you. So same kind of question. What are the common misperceptions, and what do you wish people, early and mid-career professionals, what would you like early and mid-career professionals to know? And also, I think Simi brought up this real point. How does industry view applicants that move directly from a postdoc into industry compared with those who spend a longer time in academia? And also the question that Simi touched on, right? So now that you're in medical affairs, are you sort of railroaded into a medical affairs position, or how do you see the transitions within industry? So there's a lot there, but let's see how, what you'd like to touch on of those 3 or 4 questions.
Yeah, I think I still feel like I'm very early in my industry career. I spent 15 years in the academic research space, but still feel very green in terms of industry. So there's that caveat there. But I think when I was trying to transition across, I think a lot of people thought that a medical science liaison role in medical affairs was very salesy, that we were trying to sell drugs, that it was all transactional, it was very money driven. And that's not at all what it is. I'm very much not tied to sales. That's very much, a compliance thing where I cannot be tied to sales. And I just get paid to geek out and to share information about science, diseases, mechanism of action of drugs, and hear people's perspectives and inspire kind of eureka moments, both internally and externally. So I get to nerd out on a daily basis. And I don't think that was really something that I realized could happen in industry. I think, I do miss the ideation that comes from being in an academic translational research environment, but I still am very mentally stimulated in this medical science liaison role. And I think I actively choose to be in the rare disease space as well, because that to me feels incredibly purposeful. So I can see my conversations with clinicians are actually leading to them thinking about patients differently and changing their patient management and actually changing people's lives and families and things like that. So I think just that it's not salesy, it's much more purposeful. And I think I was also led to believe that I'd be really bored, and I'm not ever. I don't necessarily feel that I'm boxed into being in medical affairs. I chat with people within my company to try and understand their career paths, kind of meet for a virtual coffee. There's a lot of kind of regulatory positions, compliance, things like that. So I'm still very much trying to understand what I could do next. I'm incredibly fulfilled doing what I'm doing right now as an MSL. So I don't necessarily feel the need to change paths, but I am actively growing in this position and I'm open to kind of learning more every day and figuring out what's next because I certainly don't have a 5-year plan either.
I love it. And how do you think, as you mentioned, you were in academia for 15 years, how did that, do you think, impact either positively or negatively your transition to industry?
Yeah, I think it maybe made my transition a little bit easier because I was very much in a business academic environment. My mentor was a clinician scientist and had a very large research group that she had to run a little bit like a business. So I learned a lot of the business side of things, how to communicate science in a meaningful way to people that aren't scientists. So I think that really helped me quickly hit the ground running in terms of medical science liaison role. But some of my colleagues have come fresh from postdocs. Some have done fellowships within industry for a year and a half, so they've kind of been exposed to different aspects. So there are kind of other ways to get into this that are equally respected. And I think it's just as long as you're willing to learn, you show that learning agility and that motivation. I think it just depends who you are and how you show up. Yeah.
Yeah, and we also, I don't know if this is true for you, we also have a fair number of PharmDs and medical health, former healthcare professionals who have left their practice in medical affairs as well.
Yeah.
Uh,
And that
so,
certainly contributes to just a really strong team, and we
yeah.
leverage all of our different strengths. So, great point.
Agree. All right. And Johnna, we're going to end with you with in terms of misperceptions about careers in industry and what would you like early and mid-career professionals to know? And then, as you mentioned, you've been a hiring manager. And so that last question too about how industry views applicants who move directly from a postdoc into an industry who spend versus those who spend maybe a little bit longer time.
Yeah. So I guess that one of the common misconceptions, and this, I'm surprised this still percolates through the academic fields, is that in research we don't do, or in industry we don't do real research, or we don't do high quality research. I mean, we are doing research to support drug development programs, and so by default, we are sort of under a microscope, much more than most of our academic professionals. The caveat is that publications aren't as critical, and so maybe that is some perception of the quality of the work. But publications are important. We publish. When I was at Novo Nordisk, like that was a big thing. Like we would publish most of our work. Sometimes it took a lot longer because it had to go through patent attorneys. But for the most part, we did publish. And I just started at Protagonist, but they also do publish. And the quality of research is, in my experience, I have found that it is much higher It is much more controlled. We don't necessarily have a lot of the creativity and the flexibility that maybe an academic who's working on a single pathway does. But we are doing some pretty creative and very high quality science. We also have a lot of collaborations that are really enjoyable and mentally stimulating. And I guess the other thing is when we collaborate with academics or nonprofits, we want to be seen as partners. We are not just giving you money and going to walk away. We are going to be involved because at the end of the day, most of us are PhD scientists or very, very skilled, trained scientists who've been doing this for a really long time. And we want to be valued that way. We're not sort of just giving you money to address whatever you want to do and we'll check back in a year. That's not really how we like to operate. And I guess from the what to know sort of going into an industry role, the science is important, but you also have to be able to interact with other people and you have to be able to navigate a disruption to your schedule, like meetings every single day. That can be a challenge if you're trying to sort of do experiments. Cells grow when they grow, animals need to be taken care of, but you still have to have that meeting that might take an hour and it might go over, or it might just pop up on your calendar that morning and throw everything in a tizzy. And I guess one of the other misconceptions is that a lot of things that in my role as a VP for a biology team or previously as a scientific VP, a lot of my time is spent talking to and managing people and mentoring them and sort of building those connections, and not as much as you would think of like knee deep in science and data. It's there, but a lot of it is talking to people and sort of building those connections and also putting out fires. And so I think if you like that, then that's really a job for you. I also have to think about the big picture, and so I can't just focus on what it is that I'm working in or where I'm sitting in the org chart. I have to have the view of what I'm doing or what the team is doing and the people I'm working with, how that influences the rest of the organization. And so you have to take your blinders off, and you have to look at how what you do impacts everybody else. It's a domino effect. You're really not working in a silo. And then the industry applicants, it's going to really depend on the job that you're applying for. Most people who don't have even a little bit of a postdoc experience are going to go into an entry-level scientist position, and that's going to be called different in different companies. And in that case, we would be looking for someone who has strong experimental skills and sort of asking questions more on the technical aspects of things and the scientific expertise. If you are applying for more senior roles and you've been in academics for a little while or you have a postdoc behind you, that's when a lot of the really heavy, like critical thinking, how do you put the bigger pieces together is going to come into play. And the longer you're in industry, I think from my perspective, there are going to be a lot more questions about why now. And so you need to have a very clear response as to why you are going into industry or wanting to go into industry now if you've been in academics for 10, 15, 20 years. And it can't be that you're tired of writing grants or whatever. It needs to be something that is authentic and sort of resonates with really where you want to go in your career. Most of those positions, like if you're in academics for a long time, there will be a lot more digging into teamwork and sort of how you see projects. Like, do you feel like you own them? And so there will be a lot more discussions about like, how do you work with other people? How do you work with difficult personalities? How do you work with egos? How do you juggle multiple projects that might be out of your scope, especially if you're going into a manager role? I think that's
All right.
a big answer. Please reach out. I mean, I'm happy to have like side conversations if you have specific questions, or if anybody wants to just chat about career paths. I'm happy to jump on a call, or if you're in the San Francisco area, meet for a cup of coffee.
Great, Johnna. That's a great segue to our end, which was going to be what's the one piece of advice that you would give? And we've got to be super quick here. And so I think maybe Johnna, you just gave yours. I always will also on the heels of that, what network. Use LinkedIn. Industry scientists are now using it as a platform to not only advertise what their companies are doing, but also to advertise themselves to position themselves for the next round. I know Simi is a super active user of LinkedIn. I'm trying to get there. And as Johnna said, I think we all, if you want to connect with us there and have conversations, even if our roles aren't what you want to do, we know lots of people too. So, all right, I'm just going to go down the line. We've got like 15 seconds, 20 seconds each. Lucy, what's your number one piece of advice?
In addition to everything you just said, read the book Rejection Proof: How I Beat Fear and Became Invincible Through 100 Days of Rejection. That's an amazing book and really helps to empower you to do the scary things.
Love it. Maggie?
Always have multiple mentors for all aspects of your life.
Agree. And you're never too old to have mentors. I mentor people and I also have mentors. So super important. Johnna, I will give you an extra if you want to say anything else. Oh, you're on mute.
Network. Don't hesitate to reach out to people. The worst they'll say is no, or they won't respond.
Exactly. And Simi, you get the last word.
Yeah, I would say venture out, start with a small collaboration or a rotation, do a pilot project, do it for free if you have to. Just enter a space or experiment in a space that you've never worked in, that you've looked at from afar and would like to know more about.
Love it. And on that note, we are at 1 o'clock. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. And if anybody has any ideas for future webinars, please let us know. So thank you, everybody, for your participation. And thanks especially to the panel.
Thanks, Jess.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.